Hi, my name is Jacario Smith. I am a student teacher from the spring 2017 semester, and this is my product of learning on 3D shapes. Class details. I worked at Rockwell Elementary in Rockwell, North Carolina, where the principal is Ms. Jennifer Warden and the assistant principal is Jennifer Brown. I worked in the kindergarten classroom with my cooperating teacher, Mrs. Kayla Jones, and we had a total number of students of 19. We had 12 males and 7 females. Class demographics. Our ethnicity was Caucasian, 18 students, mixed race, 1 student. We had 3 students who received services during the day for special needs. POL area of study. We studied 3D shapes, and during this unit we put in substandards and learned about things in writing, social studies, science, and technology integration. The main standard that we focused on was comparing 2- and 3-dimensional shapes in different sizes and orientations, using informal language to describe their similarities, differences, parts, etc. One of the substandards that we did, students had to compose informative and explanatory text in which they described and wrote about the observations that we did for our row, stack, slide lesson, in which students observed 3D shapes and whether they would roll, stack, or slide. We used technology in this unit to do a multimedia presentation, and we also used technology to do a scavenger hunt throughout the building where students had to find different 3D shapes to take pictures of to later use in their multimedia presentation. We also used 3D shapes to build a 3D shaped city, and students were able to collaborate with each other to build this city. As you can see here, we have 2 of the main parts, and we had 2 other parts that the students worked on to do together. Content objectives. Students learned about 3D shapes with 2D and other 3D shapes in which they compared and contrasted these shapes. They observed and recorded what they saw during our row, stack, slide lesson. They wrote about their observations in narrative form, and they also collaborated with each other to build a 3D shaped city out of the materials that were donated by parents during our unit. They also worked to do a multimedia presentation in which they talked about the many things that they learned about from our unit and to display their knowledge. Assessment strategies. Formative assessment, we did station activities in which you can see here one of our students showed that she understood the majority of the things that we learned about in our unit, and she demonstrated the knowledge that she had about 3D shapes. We did a scavenger hunt. For summative assessment, we did a test, and we did our multimedia presentation that the students displayed to the parents on math night. Here we have our overall data graph. Student number 2 was no longer present at the school. Student number 7 did not take the post-assessment. Student number 14 was no longer attending school upon my arrival way back in February or January. And student number 1 was not present for the pre-assessment. But as you can see in our graph, all the students showed growth of some sort, or they demonstrated some knowledge of 3D shapes. Given the prior to teaching this unit, they learned about 3D shapes through a song that we did in our calendar. Assessment data, pre-assessment data. The average was 56, the range was 50, the highest grade was 87.5, and the lowest grade was a 37.5. As you can see, the gap in between our lowest and highest grade was 50 points. The number of grades that I graded were 17. For our post-assessment, our average grew to a 78, and our range closed to 31.25, which is a near 20-point gain in, or gap close in the assessment data. And our highest grade was 93.75, and our lowest grade was 62.5. And the number of grades, again, was 17. So as you can see, from the pre-assessment to the post-assessment, there was growth. The mid-assessment was a double bubble map in which the students had to compare 3D shapes using the knowledge that we had learned about prior to this mid-assessment. And on this mid-assessment, I denoted a check minus or a check plus to show whether or not a student understood the material that had been taught during this unit. And in my graph, as you can see, there was no mid-assessment data, but I did do a mid-assessment, as you can see here. Implementation of data and adjustments. For the pre-assessment, I administered the pre-assessment, and once after looking at the pre-assessment and grading all of the papers, I was able to plan lessons for our guided groups and plan lessons based on the information, and using this information to help me plan these lessons to make sure that I effectively instruct students on the different levels of learning effectively, because some students showed that they had very good knowledge of shapes, given we had already sort of learned about them, and some students didn't show or understand the material that well prior to this unit, but I used that pre-assessment data to help me plan for that. At our mid-assessment, I was able to plan more effectively for the students who demonstrated that they did not know or understand much of the material that we had learned up until mid-assessment. And in doing this, I went back and used the manipulatives that we had used, which are 3D shapes, and we looked at them and talked about them in discussion and wrote down things about, what we knew about them. And we also used our anchor chart to help us look back and visualize those things that we were talking about, and using the manipulatives to also visualize what we were looking at on our anchor chart. Accommodations. Liam was one of the students who needed the most help during this unit. He needed help with his writing. Most of the things that he could tell us, we would write for him about the material that we were covering in our unit. So a lot of times we would write down the things that he would tell us, which were his thoughts about material that we were asking him about, and he would do in his own handwriting. He also received much one-on-one instruction during this unit, as he needed a lot of one-on-one instruction, not saying that the other students didn't, but he needed the most of our attention because he demonstrated that he didn't know very much of the material. So we worked with him to help him gain and retain information that was presented to him during our lessons. And he did a very good job of demonstrating this on the post-assessment, as you can see, or as you saw in the graph and the post-assessment data. Outcomes. 10 of the 19 students showed proficiency on 3D shapes. This means that students were able to reach an 80 or above on their post-assessment. 5 out of the 19 students showed growth, but were not proficient in reaching an 80, but they did show growth, which is what I was aiming for, that they showed growth from the pre-assessment to the post-assessment. Students were also able to demonstrate their knowledge via multimedia presentation, in which they put together a presentation of all the things that they had learned about those basic 3D shapes that we had talked about: cone, sphere, cylinder, and cube. And they were also able to collaborate with one another on building a 3D shaped city out of 3D shapes. And they also learned how to collaborate with one another, as I don't think that they had a very good concept of what it meant to collaborate. So this unit helped them better their understanding of how to collaborate with one another to work on a project. Collaboration. I collaborated with the tech facilitator, Miss Meredith Burrs, on the Chatterpix lesson and the iMovie lesson. She came in and facilitated our lesson so that the students could put together their multimedia presentations that they showed to their parents on math night, and also showed to the teachers as a form of a summative assessment. The Shape City, I collaborated with parents through Class Dojo in order to get the materials for this collaborative project. I collaborated with the kindergarten staff on planning lessons, sharing ideas about how to do these lessons and activities. We also worked together to do our shape scavenger hunt that we did in our school building and within our own classrooms. And I also collaborated with my Pfeiffer colleagues, Amy and Haley, to plan lessons, share ideas, and do activities, and many other things that we did during our POL unit. Impact on student learning. Students showed growth during this POL and students were able to identify 3D shapes with greater accuracy by the end of this unit. All students were able to have discussions about 3D shapes by the end of this unit, as prior to this unit, they couldn't really have a very good discussion about 3D shapes and just randomness, just bring up a topic about 3D shapes, but by the end of the unit, they were able to do so. The lower performing students showed remarkable gains in knowledge about 3D shapes. The lowest performing student went from a 37 to somewhere in, I think, the early 60 range, which was a huge growth. He grew about somewhere between 25 and 30 points. And students gained knowledge of how to use technology such as Chatterpix and iMovie. As I collaborated with Miss Meredith Burris on doing these technology integration things to help during our POL unit, and helping the students gain a better understanding of how to use technology to help further their learning. Impact on my learning. Technology is very beneficial and helpful during instruction, as it helps keep students engaged and also keeps the teacher up on modern things that can help impact learning. Assessments are very important because assessment help us to better our instruction and planning to help students have the greatest achievement with their own learning. Collaboration with colleagues is very important because we can bounce ideas off each other and plan more effectively to better help students learn. The most important thing that I learned was always overplan. You always want to overplan because you want to have too much to do rather than have not enough to do. Flexibility is important because oftentimes you may not be able to stick with your lesson. You might have to deviate off the lesson that you have planned for, but flexibility is very important because sometimes those flexible things that you need to do better help the students and better help the teacher. And in the future, I will make sure that I review things about my unit prior to teaching it, as during this unit, one of the things that I struggled with was teaching students about a cone. A cone does not have a point by definition. By definition, I told them it didn't have a point because of my own prior knowledge from when I was in school. But in the future, I will make sure to make sure that I have a better understanding of the stuff that I am teaching. Resources. We use 3D shape nets in a lesson in which we cut out the shapes and we tried to make them, but it didn't quite work out, so I kind of just scrapped the lesson and chose another lesson to teach in the place of it. We pulled a lot of ideas and activities from Pinterest. Miss Jones had a lot of pre-made teacher activities that she had from years prior, and we used a lot of those in our mid-assessment and during our unit. Cardboard boxes and recycled materials for the shape setting were some of the resources that we used, and your standard classroom materials such as glue, scissors, and stuff like that to help make shapes and to help with the things that we were doing in our unit. I would like to give a special thanks to the Rockwell administration and staff, to my cooperating teacher, Miss Jones, and my cooperating assistant teacher, Mrs. Dina Leffler. I would like to give a thanks to the kindergarten team for all the planning and activities that we did together. I would like to give a shout out or thanks to my Pfeiffer colleagues, and I would like to give a thanks to my Pfeiffer professors, and I would also like to thank my teammates at Rockwell Elementary, Amy Morgan and Haley Silvers, as they were very important in my success with this unit, and we also worked together to make sure that each one of us was very successful with this unit. So thank you for listening to this POL presentation. If you have any questions, I will be ready to answer them at my POL defense. Thank you. Have a nice day.